I am back. Steve, East European female tennis is superior. Have you an idea about this supremacy?
Is European tennis supreme?
Female tennis, women.
I'm not understanding the question. Say it again.
Okay. Why women from Russia are so strong?
Well, I think it's very simple. It's work ethic. I spent a great deal of time in Russia. Hungry dog hunts best. Vic Braden used to say that if you tell an American girl to practice 3 hours, she's going to practice 2. You tell a Russian girl to practice 3, they practice 4. I think if we study tennis, you could look at the Australians, for example. Years ago, there's so many great Australians. It took place in Sweden. There was a joke where someone was ranked number 7 in Sweden and number 5 in the world. I mean, they had 6 players in the top 10 in the world at one time. So it's a very powerful understanding of the game to know that if you can do it, I can do it. It's like Michael Steek. He went off to university. He didn't have any plans to play Wimbledon, or I should say to play pro tennis, but Becker won Wimbledon in 1985, and Michael Steek said, if he can do it, I can do it. So I do think that, you look to your left and you look to your right. That's one thing that's very difficult in the United States. This country's so big. When it comes down to getting to practice or be around players that are making it, like if they can do it, I can do it. The intensity, you don't have to be politically correct when you coach tennis in Russia. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I think it's just the work ethic, the fight, but the inner belief system too. One thing that hurts Americans, for example, is in tennis, is the idea of, okay, consolation prizes, I'll get a scholarship. But I would say that most of the Russian girls that do so well is that they're 100%, they're all in. They have so little self-doubt. They plan on, being successful.
Okay.
But it's a lifestyle. It's the attitude of the household. It's, the sacrifices they make, not too much complaining. It's interesting, the Russian men, different animal, not as successful.
Okay. Another question. Coaching men and women, the mental approach by the coach is different?
Well, I get myself in trouble for saying this, but the ball doesn't know whether it's being hit by a male or a female. It's the law of physics. And especially here in the States, it's just amazing that there's all these clinics now on how to coach a woman. And I think when it comes to women's rights, liberal thinking, is the women should be saying, we don't want to hear that. Everything's the same. You coach a man or woman the same. The motor programming, I think that's where it should be. I don't think it should be, oh, well, you need to be more sensitive. Coming back to your question on Russian women, they're not slowing down. Okay, well, how do we talk to these young girls? Is that very nice? And I don't get that. I don't get all the workshops and clinics on, this is how to teach females. I think Billie Jean King, years ago, she was so successful in so many ways as a player and just an inspiration for the game of tennis. But years ago, she wanted boys and girls to be in the same age group, at least through the 12s. I mean, at one point it was through the 14s, and really that should have more tennis be played. The UTR, the Universal Tennis Rating Program, we would have more matches played if the matches or the tournaments were ageless and genderless. So, but I don't really get, this is how you coach women. I know myself, I mean, I have 2 boys. I do think that coaches are toughest on their own kids. I think that they're tougher on boys than they are on girls. I think, okay, I do chivalry. You should open the door. You should be polite. I think that, there is a place for being a gentleman 100%. But when it comes down to a forehand's a forehand, whether, there's been a lot of talk recently, Pietro, on that's a WTA forehand and that's an ATP forehand.
Okay.
I don't buy that. I mean, it's not a WTA forehand because the swing goes past their shoulder, but we had you could say a comedian, a philosopher, W.C. Fields. I mean, in one of his lines, W.C. Fields, there's a sucker born every minute. And like, well, I'll believe anything. And no, a forehand's a forehand. The racket doesn't know who's hanging onto the racket. So I don't really, I don't get in line to say, okay, I'd like to go speak and be part of this conference on how to coach women.
Okay, thanks. Steve, you watched American tennis over a long period of time. Why United States is not able to produce the likes of Sampras, Agassi, Courier, not mentioning Connors and McEnroe?
Well, tennis is a microcosm of life. So capitalism is not perfect. Money, money, money. That it's too, in the United States right now, it's too expensive to learn how to play. It's too expensive to play tournaments. I do think you have to make a case study of every person, when it comes down to, Sampras, like the Canadians right now. It's amazing how many, and all over the country too, all over the world, I should say, is that immigrants, when it comes down to Pete Sampras, both his parents are from Greece, and a young guy like that sees his parents, learning a new language, learning a new job, learning a new way in a new country. So I think it's really society. I think that, it's just like years ago, Harry Hopman said about Australia, is Australia became affluent. It's a play on the English language, affluenza, that there's a sickness involved in being rich. I think that, we did a better job in the U.S. years ago, and kids took private lessons and they stayed at home and they played other sports, and sometimes less is more. So, but once you can have one, you can have two. I think that you think of someone like a Jimmy Connors. Jimmy Connors grew up in Belleville, Illinois, and across the river, you had Chuck McKinley, Bobby McKinley. You had so many great players from St. Louis. And it's really interesting where if you have one great player, like say what happened in Australia years ago, what happened in Sweden, what happened in Spain. So if you get one, you can get two. But, I think also too is that the countries that generate so much money through the Grand Slams, British tennis, Australian tennis, American tennis, French tennis. Now, the French have an excellent system for match play. But years ago, Jack Kramer was asked by the French, we're spending more money, and at that time they're spending more money on their player development program than any other country in the world. Why are we not producing champions? And Kramer said, your answer is in the question. I think a lot of times here in the U.S., the USDA is very wealthy, and just throw money at it. And again, it comes back to the family. It comes down, more families develop tennis players than federations. So, years ago, Mrs. Armitage, VJ, Anad, Ashok, the three brothers were very good players. They were in the Davis Cup final, but they didn't play South Africa because of apartheid. So there's a program set up, the BAT program, Britannica Armitage Tennis. And remotely I had a little bit to do with that because they hired someone that I trained to teach tennis. And what they were really trying to do is they were trying to teach throughout India what Mrs. Armitage did. How did she have her young boys become so successful off the court, on the court? So it's interesting with all the sound bites. I don't think people dig as much, and I don't think people really know the stories. Like say Nancy and Cliff Ritchie from a small town in West Texas. You know, before Safin and his sister came along, arguably they were the best brother-sister combination in the history of tennis, but they were from a small town out in West Texas. So I think that we've lost our work ethic. I do think that the consumer, the people bop and shop, they don't stay with one coach. I think also too, it's too easy to become a coach. So lots of problems with American tennis. The growth of American tennis is way down as well.
Okay, good explanation. Lately, Canadian tennis produced many good players. Do you know how? Canadian tennis?
Yeah, I'm asked about Canadian tennis all the time, and I could have you talk to many Canadian coaches. For the longest time, Canadians, they had a superiority complex in hockey and an inferiority complex in tennis. Of course, the Great White North, there's lots of snow in Canada, and the winters are long. And every young kid said, and their parents too, we have to leave Canada, leave Canada. But it's really the immigrants, like say, I don't pronounce his name, Denis Shapovalov.
Yeah.
His mother, Tessa, she worked for one of my students for 10 years. And just to hear the story about, how committed they were. I do think that, the Canadians do a lot of things really well, though. They typically on the road for junior tennis, they'll send an old coach and a young coach. I think that's a very smart thing. One thing they don't do in the US is that, like say the European circuit, the 14 and under circuit, the top Canadians will go over there in the beginning of the summer, play on the red clay. They go home, they play their nationals, they come back to Europe again. The Canadians run their junior program, their tournaments, where if you play the 12s, the 12s, 14, 16, and 18s are not all at the same time. They have the 12s, and I believe it's if you get out to the quarterfinals of the 12s, you get to go to the 14s. And you get to the quarterfinals of the 14s, you get to go to the 16s. So, again, the Canadian tennis, I'm an insider to Canadian tennis. I've taught a lot of kids that have done quite well in Canadian tennis, taught a lot of Canadian pros. But I think the biggest thing they have, it comes back to just all the girls with the last three letters of OVA on their name, is you have that fighting spirit. And it comes back to the immigrant, like Agassi, Chang. There's great players in this country that their parents were immigrants. Roger Federer's mother is a South African who grew up I guess at the age of 18, moved to Switzerland. You think of Federer's wife, who's a great tennis player.
Yeah.
She's an immigrant.
Mirka.
I've spent quite a bit of time in Switzerland. What a beautiful place. But, you think of Martina Hingis.
Yeah.
She's an immigrant.
And many Switzerland players are immigrants.
Yeah, it's a beautiful country with a lot of reasons to want to live in Switzerland. But when it comes down to same thing with Canada. Most Canadian coaches would tell you that Canadian tennis is overrated. It's just like with like the Swedes in the 1980s. I went to Sweden. I've been there many times, but I went there to study tennis, and you get a small group of people just like the Australians, and they feed off of each other, and they travel together. And it comes back to what I said earlier. If you can do it, I can do it. It's kind of like Roger Bannister with the 4-minute mile. When he broke the 4-minute mile in 1954, I believe it was 4 people that did it the same, broke it within the same year. With Jeannie Bouchard had that great year where she was, I think, 7 in the world or 5 in the world. And Andreescu, she has no awe factor for Jeannie Bouchard. She's just looking and going, if she can do it, I can do it. Okay. It's kind of like Pete Sampras. When Pete Sampras had his first big win, he was 17 years old. He beat Elliot Telscher, who was top 10 in the world. but he had no off factor because Elliot Telscher and Pete, they grew up at the Jack Kramer Tennis Club, and Pete says, "Oh, that's not such a big deal."
Okay, thanks. Steve, holes in the game. Which are the most common holes?
Say that again, please.
Which are the most common holes in the game?
Which champions have the most holes?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good question. I think you can see their holes when they play on different surfaces. Of course, now that they've changed the grass at Wimbledon, pretty much people can play the same style on every Grand Slam surface. But years ago, I mean, there was great players that would they didn't want to go play on clay, or they didn't want to go play on grass. I do think that people hide their holes, and you can see that, for example, if someone has a weak backhand volley, they're going to go, what we say, they're going to go for the $100 shot from the 10-cent position.
I learned this data from Handy. 100 shot from 10-cent position.
But the player with the most holes, Andy just walked into the room. He could think about that. I think years ago people would ask, well, if you could coach one player, I mean, to pick somebody out, like how could you, help them out? Like say a Dimitrov, the Bulgarian. I mean, he's so fast. He's very gifted, but he's got, how's he going to hit his backhand down the line? I mean, if you have a hole in your game, the pros will find it. So yeah, I'd have to stop and think about that. Andy, you think of anyone? Holes in your game? With when it comes down to Jack Kramer playing Pancho Gonzalez, Kramer had used to say that the reason he bought a golf course and built a tennis club is he knew under pressure that Pancho Gonzalez was going to hit a ball a certain place. I don't think tennis players at the top right now study the game like they used to. Here in the United States, I mean, it used to take a player 22 days to go to Australia by boat, get on a ship to Australia. I think back about Jimmy Connors, for example, when he got suspended many times for his behavior, he made more money playing exhibitions than he did when he played on the tour. So he wasn't so concerned about being suspended. I don't think people actually sit around either and watch tennis. I think they even like the cell phone. I don't think that the players are as knowledgeable as they should be about what the players' holes are in their games. You don't see that many players really make changes. They, like here in the U.S. college tennis, a lot of college players, so they get better because they become more mature, they develop physically. But we say a lot of them, they enter college tennis and they leave college tennis. I think of someone like an Aaron Krickstein, a great tennis player, but he left the pro tour pretty much playing the same way as he did as a junior. I mean, he was a world-class tennis player. Vilander, I always talk about Vilander. He's somebody who truly, changed their game, added to their game. But I think, again, players are so stubborn, which can work for them or against them. But I think most players get locked in. But I'll think about that more and get back to you.
Okay. This is a joke.
Okay, I like jokes.
Okay. Steve, did you watch Wimbledon final Roger versus Djokovic?
I watched it, yeah.
Okay. So, Roger had 2 match points. If you were Roger's coach, what would you have suggested? Serve and volley, maybe?
Well, I wrote an article one time, it was published. Dear Mr. Roger Federer, sir. And these numbers are fairly accurate. When he played Nadal the first time in the final at the French, I'd have to look it up, but I think he came in 17% of the time and he won 73%. I think he should really be managed by stats. When his agent, Tony Gottsick got Roger, he played so well. I think it was 2017, Andy, where he played against Nadal in Australia. And he said he played the best 20 minutes of tennis of his life. When his agent said to him, "I want you to use analytics," the first time Roger said, "Well, I think it's too expensive." And his agent kind of laughed and said, "Well, you got $700 million or whatever the figure was." He goes, "I think you can afford it, but if you don't want to pay for it, I will." And then Roger came back the second time and said, "Well, I don't want to have all those numbers in my head." But as great as Federer is, he would run around his backhand and hit his forehand and then Nadal's lefty forehand. And then Djokovic comes on the scene and he has such a great two-handed backhand. But there is a brain drain. I get in trouble for saying this, but all the way to the top, I think people are intimidated by pro tennis. But I've been around pro tennis enough. I know Andy has as well, that they're not managed by stats. It's amazing how many of them don't even look at stats. Someone goes to the net, and they were to win 2 out of 3, it turns into 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12, 16 out of 24. Roger, certainly in his career, he would have more Grand Slams if they didn't change the grass at Wimbledon. He would have more Wimbledon titles for sure. Roger Federer, in that famous match where he beat Sampras, he came to that more in that one match than he did in the fortnight, 2 weeks. For 5 years for Wimbledon, the entire tournament, he came to the net less in the entire tournament than he did in that match. But, so you're playing against Sampras, and it's a race to the net. Who's going to capture the net? But people need to read and listen. What do the pros say? Roger Federer will simply tell you that I like my forehand better than I like my volleys. When he was being coached by Edberg, people said, well, he did come to the net a bit more. And he said, if I could volley like Edberg volleyed better than Federer. But Federer doesn't put himself, he's very humble. He doesn't put himself way out there. That's what he said. He goes, if I could volley like Edberg, I'd come to the net more. But no, I think throughout the entire tournament that not just the finals, it's like when Lendl wanted to win Wimbledon and Tony Roach told him, you're too egotistical and you're too greedy. He got to the finals in 1987, for example, against Pat Cash. He skipped the French. What Tony Roach told him is said, you need to play the entire year, every tournament, serve and volley. You've already won everything. You're telling people you want to win Wimbledon. Don't wait to 2 weeks before to think that you're going to become a serve and volleyer. So, no, I think that Roger, confrontation, backcourt to backcourt, okay, overall, Djokovic is a little bit better. But even Djokovic will say that Roger can do more with the ball than I can. So I think, Roger should have forced. He should have definitely, pressured Djokovic into hitting a smaller target.
I agree. I agree with you. Steve, watching your podcast and video with Andy Fitzel, you mentioned something about local coaches and gospel. Could you explain, please?
Well, I think that young junior players, they lose respect for their local coaches. And so they're invited to now join their federation. I see this all the time. And I love the 14 under circuit in Europe. I mean, it's just fantastic to see all those kids from all over the world playing on red clay. And so when they do go, they're selected, they're taken away from the local pro. And then the federation, the national coach, the coach with the impressive title, gospel, it means the word of God is that, you have to listen. So I think a lot of times, what the player does is they stop listening to the local coach and then they listen to the new coach. And the new coach isn't necessarily better than the old coach.
Okay, Steve, we finished the interview.
All right, Pietro.
We thank you for the time you spent and for the knowledge you shared with us.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
What about a second episode?
Yeah, we could do that. maybe the next time I should speak in Italian. What do you think? No, I'd love to do it another time. And I hope that you and your listeners got something out of it, but we could do that again.
Steve, I can teach you Italian. You will be the second student. The first is Craig Webster.
Craig Webster from
Yeah.
South Africa. I remember Craig Webster. He's probably 10 years older than I am, but I can remember playing tournaments when every year, it seemed like it was every year, he would have a group of South Africans that he would bring to the United States. But I remember meeting him many, many years ago. Certainly, I see his name on social media, but I remember Craig Webster from the, I guess it was the 70s, 1970s.
He's a good friend of mine, and we chat almost every day.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to, when the pandemic gets behind us, yeah, I would love to get together with you and Craig in person. That would be great.
Okay. Steve, I stop recording. I thank you again.
No problem. I'd like to thank Andy because he
Okay.
put this together for me.
Okay, I am in contact with Andy. Thank you.
All right.
Ciao.
Pietro, thank you. All right.